So this webinar today is the second in a series called Mobilizing Communities for Local Climate Action. It's all about sharing stories of how municipalities and community members and partners are working together to advance local climate action. It's co-hosted by Climate Reality, Climate Action Partnership, Climate Caucus, David Suzuki Foundation, and Tamarack Institute. Our previous webinar in October featured a really great deep dive into two inspiring stories. One was on youth-led advocacy for affordable transit in Regina, and another one was around the community mobilization to protect the Vancouver gas phase-out commitments last year. So if you missed that one, we'll be sending out the recording. We can send out the recording in the follow-up email to this session too. And today's session will of course be recorded too. Today we're turning the focus towards public engagement as another kind of site for community municipal collaboration. We'll be learning from our speakers about how a residence reference panel can provide people the opportunity to have a hand in shaping climate policy in a more direct and meaningful way than is sometimes possible through other forms of engagement, and for municipalities on their part to generate community input that is representative and informed by thoughtful deliberation. As you can see for yourselves, we're in webinar format today. So if you have any questions for our panelists at any point throughout the discussion, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and make sure to put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat, just for ease of me finding them later. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to go through some questions. And we also have my colleague Ashley Anthony from Climate Reality, who's going to be monitoring the chat. So yeah, if you have any technical issues or other questions, then she'll also be talking to you there. I am based in Winnipeg, Manitoba on Treaty 1 territory, which is the lands of the Anishinaabe, Anisininew, Nahewatuk, Sedi-Sequoin, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our office with Climate Reality is in Montreal or Jojage, the traditional territory of the Ganyangahaga or Mohawk Nation. We recognize our collective responsibility to dismantle the systems of oppression that created the climate crisis and start by listening to the wisdom of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. We are committed to amplifying Indigenous voices and supporting Indigenous-led solutions for climate justice. And I think that the theme of this whole series, including today around participation and democracy and collective decision-making, kind of ties into what we talk about when we talk about land acknowledgements and Indigenous relations as well. I wanted to provide just a quick background and introduction to the Toronto Residents Reference Panel on Inclusive Climate Action before we dive into many more details with our speakers. A residents reference panel is a group of randomly selected people who are tasked with closely examining an issue or policy and making consensus-based recommendations that reflect the concerns and priorities of the community. The mandate of the Toronto Reference Panel on Inclusive Climate Action was to examine how existing and future climate policy and programs can be inclusive of all residents and aligned with community values. The panel consisted of 35 randomly selected residents who participated in 3 meetings over November and December 2024. And again, yeah, we'll learn from our speakers about kind of the next steps after that. This is the kind of, Jasmine called it the class photo of all of the participants. And these are our speakers today. First, we have Sarah Rodriguez, who is a senior project manager at the City of Toronto's Environment, Climate, and Forestry Division. She is currently leading climate policy development aimed at the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions within the existing building sector. Over the last 9 years, Sarah has been involved in creating and leading many public consultation and engagement opportunities to inform climate action in Toronto, including hosting both the residents' reference panel we're here to talk about today in 2024 and a previous one in 2019 that was also on climate action. Next, we have Jasmine Kay. Jasmine is a director with Mass LBP, a Toronto-based firm, which worked with the city on the design and delivery of the panel. Over her 4 years with Mass, Jasmine has led projects on primary care reform, municipal approaches to substance use and addiction, auto insurance reform, and climate change. Most recently, she chaired the Canadian Youth Climate Assembly, a national citizens' assembly of young people aged 18 to 25 that presented its recommendations to a group of senators and members of parliaments in September of 2025. So that's a really cool initiative that I feel like we could do a whole nother webinar on. But if you want to learn more about the Youth Assembly, then I encourage you to check out Mass's work. And finally, we have Michael Demeter, who will be providing his perspective as a resident participant on the panel. So I'd like to especially thank him for lending his time to be here today. Michael was born in Montreal and moved to the Toronto area as an adult, where he currently lives. As an elementary school teacher for over a decade, he sees how our youngest Canadians are faced with much more complex and challenging climate issues than ever before. He volunteered for the reference panel on inclusive climate action to help our future leaders create a world in which they can thrive for generations to come. So with that, I think pretty good framing, we'll go into the panel discussion. I'm going to close out my slides here, and I'll invite the panelists to turn on your cameras if you haven't already. So the first question is for Jasmine. I was wondering if you could just, I guess, provide a little bit more of a fulsome intro to the Toronto Reference Panel and kind of situate it against other forms of participatory public engagement.
Sure. Okay. Hannah, thank you. I mean, to you and to Lauren and your partners for kind of organizing this webinar. This is great. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday afternoon. And special thanks to Sarah and especially to Michael for stepping away from your day jobs to kind of talk about this thing, the Toronto Residents Reference Panel on Inclusive Climate Action, a long name, but pretty much tells you what it was about. So reference panels are these things that we call long-form deliberative processes. And you'll hear them referred to kind of in other jurisdictions or in other kind of areas as citizens' assemblies, citizen juries, mini publics. And the organization that I work with, Mass LBP, we've been kind of designing and hosting these processes for 18 years. And panels and assemblies, they do have a few defining characteristics that can distinguish them from other participatory engagement processes like budgeting and the policy crowdsourcing that I think I saw in blurb for this webinar. At a high level, first is the way in which participants or members are recruited and selected, and I can share more about those details. And the second way in which they can be different is in what folks are asked to do when they step into it. So panels and assemblies use what we call a sortition-based recruit method that we call a civic lottery to select people in a fair and representative way. So characteristics of a civic lottery include random invitation, a voluntary response, and representative selection. So as an example, for this panel, we mailed a letter, I think it was to 10,000 randomly selected households, inviting someone from that household to volunteer for the reference panel. The opportunity was also published on the city's website, and I think sent out through a couple of different city mailing lists. And the goal of a civic lottery is to ensure that like kind of ordinary people, so not just those who are most vocal or those who are already engaged, have an equal chance to participate in helping to kind of influence a policy or a decision that's going to be made. And so I think we had more than 300 people volunteer for this panel. And from that, we then kind of selected randomly, but also intentionally, a group of 36 folks. At the end of the day, we went forward with 35 because one person had to step away. But we randomly selected 36 people along 6 kind of socio-demographic criteria, so that the final group broadly represented Torontonians, kind of writ large. And so the core criteria that we used for this panel were things like gender, age, and ethnicity. And then there were a couple of criteria that were very specific to the topic of this panel, which was originally a bit more building emissions related. And so we selected for diversity in housing tenure, as well as housing type and for income. So the group of 35 people who came together were broadly representative of Torontonians along these kind of 6 criteria. That's kind of one way in which panels and assemblies can be a little bit different than other methods of engagement. When folks get into the room, the panel or the assembly asks people to do things a little bit differently than maybe other kind of processes do. They're convened to solve a problem, and to do so after they've spent often close to half of their time learning about the different facets of that problem from a range of perspectives. So this panel was convened to provide City of Toronto staff with their best advice on how to ensure that climate action in Toronto is inclusive and equitable. And Sarah's going to share a bit more about the panel and the context and all that. But the long and the short of it was that staff already had a plan, it was Transform TO, and they wanted guidance on how to ensure that climate action was actually going to be able to speak and reach the broad diversity of residents that the plan really needs to be able to touch. So I looked to this group of residents to help give them some advice on their best advice on how that could happen. So the members spent 3 full Saturdays together in November, December of last year. And over the course of 22 hours, they heard from 13 different subject matter experts. And I think a little bit later, I'll show you a little bit more like what those 3 days look like. But it's all about problem solving. And it's about having a solid base of good information to work from. And it's about finding common ground about what is good for the broader community of public. So the conversation is more than what any one individual's preference or opinion. And so what happens is they come into a room and then there's a lot of dialogue and exchange in small groups. They work in small groups, they share back out in plenary. And so it's grounded in learning, like learning from the subject matter experts, but also learning from each other and about each other. So that they're working through their differences in a really productive way. So kind of at a high level, that's what a panel is. And I'm going to hesitate to compare it directly to other participatory processes. I know the question kind of asked for that, but implementation, matters. And I know processes can vary. And I don't want to suggest that other participatory processes can't also kind of have these similar aims or similar ways of working. But at its core, an assembly or a panel is always aiming to provide people with enough information and time to kind of both learn and to change their mind so they can deliver useful advice. And in doing so, the big hope and often what happens is that we're enhancing trust and democratic resilience between the members themselves and often the members and the client. So they come to see each other and understand each other like a bit differently and a bit more deeply. So, I mean, I'll stop there, but kind of at a high level, that's what an assembly panel is.
Great. Thanks, Jasmine. And yeah, I guess I think like what excited me learning about the reference panel and other forms of like participatory democracy is that in the climate world, I know currently like we spend a lot of time talking about like polarization and misinformation. And I realize that more participatory processes like aren't necessarily a magic bullet that's going to solve everything, but especially allowing the time for more deliberation and for participants to hear other people's opinions and negotiate in some kind of conversation there, I think is an aspect that is especially kind of useful in our current time. So thanks for thanks for that introduction. And I next want to go to Sarah to kind of speak from the city's perspective around how you came to this decision of how to do a residence reference panel and what the city kind of saw as the advantage of this kind of engagement.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. And thank you for the organizers. And And thanks to my fellow panelists for being here as well. I think to answer this question, it's really useful to give you a little bit of context. And you sort of alluded it to in my intro, is that back in 2019, our division hosted a residences reference panel on climate action. And at that time, our policy team had been tasked to present a short term climate action plan to council. And we knew we had done a study not too long before that, where we learned that two-thirds of Torontonians wanted their city government to do more to address climate change, but we didn't understand exactly what residents thought was worth doing or what the priorities were, especially where we're crafting this short-term action plan. Where should we invest a lot of our time and effort into some of these climate actions? So that panel dug into that question, and we were motivated to do a panel at that time. Our colleagues in City Planning Division had hosted a reference panel. I believe it was the first for the City of Toronto, and they had really great things to say about it. And it was, participatory democracy was something that was really being talked about in sort of our community practice internally amongst engagement leads across different divisions. And so we were really invested to kind of give it a shot. And it was such a great experience that, fast forward 5 years later, we're in 2024 and we're exploring options to do a residence reference panel for for informing sort of our work. It started off with the idea of like trying to inform a buildings related policy, and then we realized there's a lot of efforts happening at the same time, and so we sort of were able to kind of collaborate among some of our other units in our division, as well as some colleagues in other divisions to do this. So it's really it's a meaningful type of engagement. It's impactful, and it has resonated with me a lot. I think one of the biggest advantages of this kind of engagement is that staff get to genuinely hear and understand and connect with the perspectives of so many different residents. And there's something really magical about watching a group of people work together to find common ground. And the more time, like with more time to spend with residents through this process, we're able to share more, details about our work, get everyone on the same page, get into the details, and clear up misinformation or misunderstandings. And, with the sort of skilled facilitation of like mass LBP, it really helps people recognize and work through their own biases as well. So it just really encourages folks to think at a community level, which sort of puts them in our shoes. As policymakers, we have to always think at such a broad community level, and so sort of seeing residents take that on is really is such a great thing to witness. And you end up with this report that's thoughtful, it's grounded, and it's really truly reflective of such a diverse group. So, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about the advantages, but in a sense, that's sort of what we wanted to end up with, and that's what we got.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah. Um, just one more question for I guess kind of both Sarah and Jasmine, starting with Jasmine. I'm wondering if you can describe the steps involved in pulling the panel together, and what that kind of looked like.
Yeah, so there are many steps. I mean, it starts with the mandate, kind of like, and so work with the city. You always work with the partners to kind of understand what is the mandate of the panel. Like, what are we asking people to come into the room and do? A mandate is so important because it really does set kind of the parameters of the problem that we want solved, right? Or that we're asking folks to solve. And so for this one again, it was like to give City of Toronto their best advice on how to make climate action inclusive and equitable. And so that helps us kind of then determine, okay, what is the right kind of learning? What does the curriculum look like, right? What does the flow of conversation look like? So time spent kind of coming to the right mandate. And then from that, it's about drafting that invitation letter that Michael and 10,000 others across the city kind of receive, that kind of sets out that invitation. And then waiting for folks to respond. And then kind of the lottery where we actually do kind of in a digital format, draw folks from a hat. We've also done some work to develop the representation model to ensure that we are pulling together a group of folks who are broadly representative of Torontonians kind of at large, and then designing the program. There's also on our end like a lot of support that we offer to panelists. So one of the things that's kind of special about a panel and assemblies is the way in which we're trying to remove barriers, so folks can come into the room and participate as fully as possible. It looks like a lot of different things. I mean, it's about kind of work stipends if folks are needing to take time off work. It's about helping to pay for childcare and elder care. We gave, I think, everyone transportation money. It's about kind of answering any questions. We have like a 188 number, like, you know, emails, like just really kind of supporting. It's a role we call civic concierging. And it really is about kind of supporting the members to kind of move through the process with us as fully and as comfortably as so I'll stop there and start. Yeah, from your perspectives, the steps. There were many.
There were many, and I think working with a municipality, there's always a few extra just sprinkled on there for fun, which we won't get into. But you know, it's a complicated, it's a long process. And you know, whether this is not a step, but the emotions behind it is it's very nerve-wracking because you think like, oh, everyone's so busy, who's gonna want to do this? And are they gonna like find the topic interesting? Like, you know, there's a lot of emotion and nerves behind it. But you know, people always pull through, and that's again, it just energizes you when you see so many people volunteering and wanting to talk about this, learn about it, participate, have their say, have their voice. So, really, really rewarding. A lot of upfront work, but very rewarding when you start to see those people sort of like check off saying, yes, you know, count me in. I want to volunteer. So, that's really great. I part for us. Um, you know, that was sort of a very critical step. You know, a lot of things have changed since our last panel. You know, we did that panel in 2019, but then we declared a climate emergency later that year. We changed our climate action strategy from 80% reduction by 2050 to a net zero by 2040 target. So a lot more ambitious. And so you know, we knew very much like what we needed to do. Like over the last 5 years, we have a really good understanding our division in terms of all of the greenhouse gas emissions modeling work that we do, like where what actions need to be taken. But we really wanted to understand how do we get residents involved in these actions? Where can we reduce barriers? Where can we enhance some of our programs? You know, and just really making sure that we sort of get those key questions asked by the panel. So that was a really important step, is trying to understand like what it is that we were looking for as staff, so that you know the work's not redundant, the work's not you know, obsolete, that it's actually going to be super useful and critical, and it could be leveraged by so many of our staff in terms of communications planning, outreach planning, policy making, development, program enhancements. So so that it's really useful.
Great, thank you. And so, yeah, you both have mentioned and talked about the process of recruitment and sending out those letters. So then on the other end of that, Michael, you got one of those recruitment letters and responded to it. So, yeah, can you tell us about that story, I guess, how you found out about the panel and why you decided to apply to participate?
Well, hi, thank you for having me. It was exactly that. So I did receive the letter in the mail, filled it out, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to have a say in what happens in the city. And I teach in a primary school, so we do a lot of work with Eco Schools Canada, and so there's a lot of eco education that happens within the school. And I thought we're going to be talking about this all day with our eco team, so why not talk about it with the residents and see if we can actually make a difference in the city? Because we're doing our best within the school and within our homes. So this is a way to like broaden the reach for all of the things that we've been working on within the schools. And I think it was a great experience to get an idea of, or a sense of what other people are doing around the city, or what bothers them, or what works well for them. And having the background with the eco schools and with teaching eco education in the classrooms, it's really I thought I knew more. I knew more than everyone else, but in actuality, I learned a lot while I was there. And there were the professionals that came in, and I thought, wow, I don't know that much at all, actually. There's so much more that's happening. But it was great to be able to have that opportunity to share my ideas and the things that I thought, wait, maybe we could do this, or maybe this is working. And they were very receptive to that. It was such a great experience. Mhm.
Awesome. Yeah, obviously it's like a little bit of a larger commitment on the part of a participant than just maybe like showing up to a single town hall. And even though there are like a lot of supports built in, as Jasmine was talking about, to enable that participation. Yeah, obviously the trade-off for like deeper participation is taking more time out of your life to do that. Thanks, Michael. Um, so yeah, then going more into kind of the process and the day to day, I'm gonna hand it back over to Jasmine to yeah, tell us about what did each of those meetings look like? What did the day to day actually consist of?
Sorry, I'm trying to share. Okay, can you see the deck? The slide? No. Oh no.
It
Something's
says you've
happened.
started screen sharing, but it was just maybe
Not
taking a
showing.
minute to come up.
Okay, so let me try again. Uh, Sorry, sometimes this happens. Okay, so okay, let's give it a second. So what I am trying to put up on the screen for folks is basically a kind of a high level program overview that showed the 3 Saturdays. And it might not let me. Okay, give me 2 seconds to just kind of butts. But essentially, so before as I'm trying to find the slide to share with you, when we design a program, it tends to be around wanting to show have like the learning, so the curriculum that we worked with Sarah and a couple of her colleagues at the City of Toronto to kind of design to make sure that we're giving folks kind of enough information and good information that then helps them have conversations to help them to kind of give that advice to meet the mandate, so to speak. Um, and so the learning is usually about half of a panel process, and then the other half is spent in the small group discussion. In over the course of the 3 days, there tends to be, or any panel or assembly, there tends to be more learning up front, makes sense. And by the time you hit kind of the end of the process, it's all discussion. So folks are talking in their small groups, or they're sharing out in plenary and having kind of a lot of crosstalk. So for this particular assembly panel, remembering that it's people who are not experts, who are not subject matter experts in either climate change, climate action, or what the city is doing. And so we tend to start the learning with kind of a 101, right? So what is climate change? I think what our 101, just to kind of ground people. So they all have kind of a shared baseline of information around kind of some of the background and the context. And then that first day, we had a couple of presentations from city staff that talked, at a high level about kind of what the city is doing to address climate action, just to kind of orient folks to kind of what is going on at the city. And then the conversations that day amongst the small groups where they had time to talk about the different issues and the different barriers that they face kind of getting involved or taking action. And so there was a lot of small group conversation about that. So that was kind of the first day. The second day we came together, we had pulled together a panel discussion on equity and climate action. And so what does equity mean? Like what is equity and what does it mean within the context of taking climate action? Because that was such a big focus for this particular panel. And then again, we heard from a couple of folks from the city who talked about kind of different elements of their climate action plan. So I think the plan, if I'm remembering correctly, Sarah, it's built in on 3 kind of pillars. So buildings, transportation, waste, and the idea of resilience. So staff just shared a lot of kind of work underway that the city is kind of involved in terms of taking climate action according to their plan. And then the members had time to talk in small groups and start to brainstorm and share their ideas. Okay, we've heard all of what's happening. Now, what are some ideas we have for how that action could be made more inclusive, kind of more equitable? And so they had some conversations about that. And then on the third day, when they came back, we took those ideas and we asked them to kind of strip them away, like winnow them a little, like hone in. So they ended up taking some ideas off the table. We asked them to use kind of the barriers that they'd identified in the first day and kind of categorize the ideas according to those barriers, and then kind of be really critical about whether or not their ideas would actually be something that the city could action. Sort of ask them to apply some judgment as to whether or not these ideas were actually the right ideas to be putting forth in a report for the city. And then we asked them to kind of refine their ideas and turn them into recommendations. And that was like a big chunk of work on our final day together. And then I think there was a time for a little bit of a readout, so everyone could kind of hear what the tables had come up with. And then that was it. That was like a jam-packed 3 days. I'm sorry, I will see if I can find the slide and bring it to share it. I'm happy to share it afterwards, send it through email, but it seems to have disappeared off the face of the desktop.
Yes, sorry that didn't work, Jasmine, but we can definitely find another way to share it with folks.
Yeah,
And I think you did a
absolutely.
great job of very clearly laying out the day-to-day, even without the visual reference. I had a follow-up question for you. Oh yeah, I was wondering, I guess just to clarify, was there a process at the end where participants actually like voted on the final recommendations?
So no, so we didn't use any kind of voting
Okay.
process for the recommendations. And sometimes we don't often use kind of a voting process. Like the idea is that through their conversation with each other and then in share back, they're kind of working through their differences, right? So voting can be kind of like a bit of a blunt tool. There have been assemblies. So we recently did one in Victoria and Saanich around regional amalgamation. And that at the end of the day, it was a yes or no with a lot of caveats and considerations. That one, the assembly did take a vote. So not always kind of the right tool, so to speak, for a consensus-based process. But I will say one of the conversations that I think I left out was in that first reference panel that Sarah had referenced, talked about that the city that did a couple of years ago. They'd come up with this really lovely set of principles that they felt they wanted the city of Toronto to use to kind of guide its decision. And so the conversation about principles for this panel was to kind of revisit those original principles and see if they were still fit for purpose, like given a slightly different context, and given the mandate of this particular assembly to kind of hone in on inclusive climate action. And so what they did is in their small groups, they talked through the principles, kind of discussed ways they might want to tweak it, see if any came off the table, and see if there are any new ones that they wanted to add. And Michael, you'll correct me, but I think we ended up taking one off, and they added a new one, and then made some kind of language revisions to the existing. So having the new report is kind of a refreshed set of principles. So, and for that one, we did do a bit of a vote because the way in which we designed that activity was a way for people, wanted everyone to feel like they had a chance to kind of really weigh in on kind of what's what left. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And yeah, and cool that there was that process of building on the previous reference panel. I think it's always nice when things aren't just like shelved or like the process isn't totally restarted over again. And that there was like kind of a building on that work. Okay, cool. Well then, yeah, Michael, can you tell us about what that experience of actually crafting consensus like felt like with the other participants? And I mean, I haven't participated in one of these. It seems pretty hard. Did it feel hard? Did it feel easier than expected? Yeah, how did that work for you?
The process was very easy for us, the panelists, I guess, because Jasmine did an amazing job guiding us and moderating everything. I couldn't imagine how much work she had put into that before the actual panel started. It was very seamless for us to just move from one topic or from one part of the panel to or discussion to another. But it was difficult at times to agree with each other at the table. So we were at different tables, and we could move from one table to another if we needed to. Um, but we would work on one of the, I forget the I guess recommendations, but before formulating them, we had to give all of our ideas. And no idea was off the table at first. We just kind of gave everything that we would think, and then we would get a different part of the recommendations that are different recommendations, sorry, that we'd be working on. So then we would all get our ideas for that. So then they would circulate around. So we would have a chance to at least speak about each one of the things that we were addressing. And it was good that we had a starting point. We had the strategy from the few years ago, because otherwise we would just be all over the place. Um, and it really helped how Jasmine moderated and guided us, because we would have time, you know, a time limit to talk about things, so that one person wouldn't just dominate the whole table. We'd say, okay, we need to hear from other people. There were, I guess, moderators at each table to help us, guide us. And so making sure that, like I said, not one person is just giving all their ideas. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, but I don't want to take everybody's time and just have my voice, right? So it was a shared experience for everybody at the tables. And sometimes we had things to say that really bothered other people at the table, which was to be expected. And then there were some opinions that were very much centered with just one perspective, and it didn't really connect with the rest of the people at the table. And I think that was an eye-opening experience, because we don't all think the same way, and we're not all living in the same situation. So to see, for example, somebody who had suggested something along the lines of having, I think, uh, I don't remember what, like a representative that would go around and do some climate change education or something like that. It was very interesting to see different perspectives, and I thought, well, where are they going to get the money for that, right? This is like something that the city can't fund. So it's very, yeah, it was, there were some disagreements at the table sometimes, but there was a way for the person who was helping us moderate to sort of get us past that, to just get all the ideas out. And then as the days moved on, the second day we sort of refined a little bit. And then the last day, where we got to work together to actually formulate the recommendations, they, the I think we were able to, at that time, we were able to edit each other. So there was no voting, like Jasmine was saying, but we would take another recommendation, we would look through it, we would see what we would change or add, and then we would pass it along to another group. And then that way, everybody kind of got a way to edit. So it sort of ended up with all of our voices. I think that was a really good way to end that. Yeah, but there was a lot of guided um, help throughout the whole thing, so that we weren't just all over the place. There was a lot of good food as well that kept us energized and happy.
Snacks are always important. Okay, cool. Yeah, and I guess, and if I understand correctly, like, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand with these processes, it's also about like the if you're a participant, you're being asked to kind of participate not only on your own behalf, but on behalf of like all residents in the city, and kind of consider the perspective of consider a broader perspective, instead of just perhaps like coming in with your own like opinions and agenda.
And I think that was very clear that we were to respect each other's opinions and make sure that there's a space for everyone to speak. Otherwise, why are we there to contribute if we're going to take all the time? But it was very respectful.
Mhm.
There were a lot of opinions that we didn't agree with, and there were a lot that we did agree with. But yes, there was always a respectful environment, and especially when the professionals came in to talk to us about the different initiatives that are already happening and all about what climate change is. I think that really, like Jasmine was saying, it leveled all the information for us in the same level,
Yeah.
and so we were able to come at this experience with the same information, and then just bring our own life experiences and ideas to the table.
that makes sense. Cool. Okay, well, I see that at first I was worried about us like not filling the hour, and now I see that we're almost at quarter two. So we have three more questions that maybe we can kind of move through to make sure that we have time for Q&A. But yeah, Sarah, I'm wondering if you can maybe give us a quick overview of the recommendations that actually came out of the panel.
Sure, it's hard to do a quick overview of 29 recommendations.
Fair.
But I will let folks know, like, the report's been given to all of the panelists. They got a copy of the report, and as Jasmine said, they kind of got a copy of like an early draft as we were sort of like cleaning it up. And that draft's been circulated to many like internal stakeholders as well, just so that we can readily start using that information to help inform our work. But the idea was that we would post this alongside our Transform TO Net Zero 2026 to 2030 action plan. And that plan's actually going forward to committee December 4th. It was supposed to be done in September, so we were hoping for an earlier like publication of this report alongside some of their other engagement work, as well as like technical modeling work. It's like a tons of reports attached to that one initiative, but it will be released December 4th. So just letting you know that our Transform TO webpage will be updated with that report so that everyone can sort of access it. But just as a quick overview, like there was multiple barriers that we had the panelists address to participation. As I said, the mandate was really talking about how do we work within our existing initiatives and sort of be able to kind of enhance them or be able to make them more inclusive and accessible to all types of residents. And so I think it's important to note that those five barriers were lack of information and awareness, affordability and financial constraints, time and convenience, individualism and community connection, and distrust in corporation and institution. So we received a lot of recommendations around improving our Live Green Toronto communications and public outreach, such as being present or trying out to be attending more localized community spaces, finding partnerships with cultural or faith-based communities. There was a lot of enthusiasm in involving more youth and equipping youth with all of the tools and knowledge and resources that they need to help facilitate climate action or even to have just those conversations at home, particularly like children of parents who don't speak English to help sort of facilitate and bridge those connections. And a lot of that, we've already taken into consideration. We've had our AC for Seniors program this past spring and our furnace upgrade program, which is launched this summer, which is happening in multiple phases. And we started to create sort of like a youth climate leadership program around that so that we can train youth on how these programs work and sort of try to bridge that connection so that they can help facilitate those conversations with their communities as well. So again, we're trying to think of like how we can incorporate more youth in a lot of our initiatives. The other recommendation that came through was the idea of like a climate hub, which I think was, stirred a lot of enthusiasm because we had a representative from our social development, finance, and administration division, very long division. But they do community hubs, and Live Green Toronto, like we've hosted multiple different events, very successful events such as like repair hubs, learn to grow your own food, pollinator friendly gardening tips, so much of sustainability advice to residents. And so how do you sort of like be able to present and offer all of that in one place? And I think that's something that we're exploring, that opportunity, especially if community hubs is already something that's being established by another division. It offers like a really key opportunity for us to partner with them. Under affordability and the financial constraints, there was the recommendation to really help the city play a role in bulk buy purchases and helping to connect people to much more affordable retrofit equipment. Our furnace upgrade program, as I mentioned, that launched this past summer, is happening in phases. The first phase that's happening right now is free one-on-one coaching. And, just anybody who wants to kind of get an idea, wrap their head around what to do or what they should be doing, where to find certain resources. But the second phase for next year will be about the city sort of being able to make it easier, faster, and more affordable for people to replace their furnace, especially in the dead of winter when your furnace breaks down and you really don't have the time to be looking into electric heat pumps and talking to, you know, multiple consultants and the delays. So we're trying to kind of be able to make that connection, and be able to make it an affordable option for residents. So again, that's a recommendation that we're that's really pushing that work. And then we've heard other things like time and convenience, and I think that was like a very one where like ideas were sort of like being shared by everybody. And yeah, we got a lot of them about protecting our green space, waste reduction, and I think a lot of folks will be happy to know, City of Toronto just this month adopted the 10-year circular economy roadmap. So that's marking a huge milestone and in rethinking and how we sort of consume and manage our resources. And I think it really aligns very well with the vision that, I was hearing a lot of folks talk about, like where do we accessibly, refill our waters or reuse containers? Like how do we make that a convenient choice for residents to make versus having to go an extra mile out of your way to be sustainable? So that's like, I think a lot of exciting things to come. And yeah, a lot of other recommendations pop through around retrofits, and yeah, a lot of these recommendations are already moving forward. The adequate indoor air temperature bylaw expansion, there was a lot of support for that, and that's going to executive committee on December 9th. So as I said, this report really gives us the push that we need to move forward with a lot of this work. Some of these recommendations have actually made us pull back for a second to see, okay, we actually need to think about this. How do we make this more inclusive, more accessible? That's a great point. How do we put this in different languages, or how do we ensure that this is not just accessible via digital space, and how do we get to others? And then, and some of these ideas have sort of provoked, a lot of brainstorming, early conceptual ideas, which I think will still take some time to like bake and really think through like what role the city plays in that. But again, they're all great. It's a great resource to lean on, and it's just been super informative. So 29 recommendations. That's my quick overview. Sorry.
I realized that was a big ask, and it's great to know that that the actual report will be available within the next few weeks for people to do more digging into that. Um, I think that kind of I'm looking at some of the questions in the Q&A, and since we are coming up on 10 minutes left, maybe we'll just try and take some of those quickly. And I think that we have one from Ali Service here that I think kind of like goes into what you were just talking about, Sarah, talking about like the recommendations and kind of what the uptake perhaps has kind of like already looked like or might look like. Um, Allie's asking, how can you ensure the input from residents is taken seriously by leadership and council and actually incorporated into plans? And how might this differ from more traditional formal consultation processes? So I guess I'm wondering, like, maybe like part of a question to add to that is like going into the panel, like what was the commitment or plan like on the city's part around how they were going to like implement the recommendations coming from the panel?
Yeah, conducting a residence reference panel, it's not it's a huge undertaking. So I think that the fact that it takes a lot of time and effort to sort of pull this together sort of speaks to, um, our investment into the idea, and to really be sure that, we're creating something that's going to be really informative, really useful for us. How it's taken seriously, but like, we have sponsorship. Like before we take this on, we want to make sure that all of our leadership is backing up this idea, so that they can receive this report with no surprise, and that they're going to be able to kind of take this into consideration. And yeah, and I mean, beyond that, it's just I think that we always kind of lean on public consultation. That's a huge principle across the entire city, is that we always lean on engagement and consultation to sort of guide our work, to support our work, to get feedback on the work that we've done. So and even in recent, like if you ever attend sort of committee or council like YouTube. Not that everyone has time to watch an 8-hour council, but you will hear like a lot of councillors being like, has my constituents been engaged on this? What are they saying? Like, they want to know every project, every policy has, at some point been informed by their constituents, by residents. And so, yeah, a lot of these reports that we do, that we put forward in council, like we need to back it up with reports on engagement and consultation. And this in particular, it's not any different than if we did a survey or if we did, community discussion kits or any other type of engagement. It's just a bit more of a thorough report. It's recommendations that are penned by residents together who have sort of spent a lot of time building consensus. So I think it's the storytelling behind it is just a little bit different, and that's all.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking at some of the other ones here. There's so many good questions, and maybe I guess I'd invite, and maybe if multitasking is too much, but I don't know, panelists, if you're able to open the Q&A and you're also able to maybe type some answers. So I see that there's one, where did it go? I think some of these that we've already addressed, but there's one that maybe, Jasmine, I'd invite you to speak to, around, yeah, do you have any suggestions for how another community might implement a participatory democracy process? I guess I'm looking at the question from Mary Stockdale here, who is in Vernon, BC, and says, we are planning a 5-year review. Oh, can you hear this emergency alert going off in the background? Sorry about that. Um, Mary says, we are planning a 5-year review of our climate action plan in our medium-sized community of Vernon, BC. Yeah, so any suggestions about how to do it in a participatory democracy manner, and a little bit about supports for that process nationally and
Yeah,
provincially.
I mean, so I wish there was national and provincial funding. So Mass would love to see there be, like kind of like an ongoing kind of funding stream that allows municipalities of all sizes to kind of like engage their residents in a really kind of meaningful way. To my knowledge, no such thing exists yet. But how did so in a participatory democracy way, like harder for me to speak to that because I'm not going to pretend to fully have a full grasp on like all the different ways that engagement can fit within that kind of broader bucket. I will say panels and assemblies, they're a fairly structured process, and there is a bit of there's a design element to it, and so it is really about kind of working with a team that kind of knows like an assembly kind of process and can work with you to kind of understand kind of what is the problem, what's the mandate, and help work with you to kind of figure out a process that will make sense for your I'm guessing it's climate action plan for Vernon. That probably feels like a very unsatisfying answer, other than to say that no, there's no large funding pot that I'm aware of, and it is really about kind of I think finding folks who you can work with to kind of do that design work and be really intentional about how to engage people, how to bring them in the room, and then to set up a structure.
Thanks, Jasmine. Oh, Sarah, did you have something to add on that?
Yeah, I was just reading the comment from Russ as well about sometimes, I guess there's an example of one where only like 40% of the recommendations went through and they were watered down. And, in our first panel that we did in 2019, I think that was one of the questions that the panel members had is like, well, okay, great, this report that you've done, like, but how many of these did you do? And I was like, happy to speak to like majority of them were done. I think there was like one or two that weren't quite yet in development that they could be contemplated, or some of them it's a bit trickier and so they couldn't be done exactly how they were stated. And I just wanted to speak to that a little bit here in this context too, is that sometimes some of these ideas they we end up figuring out we don't have the authority to do that specifically, right? Or we can't specifically like be able to do that legislatively or other sort of restrictions. But I think that what's important to understand is that we understand the intent behind it. We want to see this change. We want, for example, we want products at the store to be scored. We may not be in the power to do that particularly, but like what role it would as staff we would say, okay, what role would we play in facilitating something like that? How can we collaborate? How can we partner? How can we advocate if it's different levels of government? So there's always still something that we can do, even if it's not said by verbatim. Like we have to understand, like this is, people want transparency, people don't want to see greenwashing. Like what is the intent behind this? And the great thing about doing this panel is that the report sort of explains what that intention is. It explains what barrier it's trying to address. It explains what principles it's based on. So we can still try to do something around that. Maybe not exactly how it's stated, just to really ensure that like we're connecting the dots here with what the community has said.
Thanks for choosing to speak to that, Sarah, because I know that it's always the question with any kind of public consultation process, but especially when people have put in so much like time and effort, is what's actually going to happen. So I'd encourage people to, I guess, stay tuned with the report being released and then what happens after that if you're interested in following along. It seems like, that there was a lot of, I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of the questions, but it seemed that there was a lot of like interest in how we can implement more participatory processes like in other places across Canada. So we'll be trying to round up some more like links and resources that we'll send out to all registered participants after this, along with the recording and some other information. I also just want to quickly give a plug also to a report that Climate Reality gave out or released last year on participatory democracy and looking at some different case studies, a little bit, not just like reference panels and assemblies, but also like participatory budgeting and even just citizens kind of advisory committees. So I'll drop a link to that in the chat. And then